Hello and welcome to the Birth Words Podcast, episode number 13. In today's episode, I'll be interviewing Carla, a fellow doula who serves a bilingual population here in Utah.
You're listening to the Birth Words Podcast. Utah-based birth doula and applied linguistics scholar Sarah Pixton digs into the language of pregnancy and birth to help expectant women claim their power as life-giving agents engaged in a praiseworthy work. This podcast aims to promote positive birth paradigms and is not intended as medical advice.
Welcome, Carla, to the Birth Words Podcast. I'm so excited to talk with you a little bit today about your experiences and perspectives.
Hi.
So could you start by introducing yourself to our listeners and include in that what your linguistic background is?
Of course. Like you said, my name is Carla, and I am a doula. I'm from the Dominican Republic, actually. I came to the United States when I was 17. So my native language is Spanish. I learned English as I was growing up grammatically, but I was able to speak English after my first year of being in the United States. I am also a mom. I'm a professional. I am a food scientist, professionally speaking, and I do lots of things. But now my passion is birth work, and I am a trained doula and an aspiring midwife.
Awesome. I'm so excited to have you here. You have so many interesting talents and passions. So,
thank you.
Can you tell us, just to give us an idea of your linguistic choices, what language do you use? Like you said that you are Spanish is your first language, English is your second language. Where do you use Spanish and where do you find yourself using English?
So I use Spanish at home with my baby girl. She's 2.5, and I choose to speak to her in Spanish only. I speak to my husband in English, though, because it just comes natural, even though he's from Colombia, so he's also a Spanish speaker. I think it's kind of like our code. We assume that my daughter doesn't understand, but she does. It's kind of like our thing. And, of course, I speak English at work. And then as far as birth works go, I've had both. I've had both scenarios where I can speak Spanish or English.
Awesome. Okay, we're going to talk a little bit more about how those things play out in your birth work in a little bit. But first, another personal question. Do you feel like your identity is tied to or reflected in your language choice?
Yes, definitely. I am talking to you in English right now, so I don't necessarily feel like I can be 100% my loud self, my loud Dominican self when I direct myself in English. And it's also, English is the language that brought me my profession, my career, college education. So when I speak in English, even though I have an accent, I am trying to make sure that everything comes out as good as it can, so that I am taking more serious in a more serious matter. So, and I feel more comfortable with my friends speaking in Spanish. But again, when I do, it's like I become fun, loud, Dominican Carla, you know?
You don't have to be as monitored.
Right.
I think that's so interesting because we talk like in linguistics about different codes and how people, even if you're speaking the same language, you shift codes or registers or kind of discourses depending on, like you're saying, in your work or your education, like we speak differently, we choose different vocabulary and different inflection based on circumstances. But I think it's so much more marked when you're bilingual and to an extent, or multilingual, whether no matter how many subsequent languages you speak. I think it's so much more marked when people are really fluent in more than one language that it's more apparent that you're kind of choosing one or another for different places where you identify yourself as, a professional or a friend in a casual setting or a mom, those different settings. Cool. So let's talk a little bit about birth work. And you mentioned that you've had a chance to work with women that are both speak English and Spanish as their primary language. So my question is, if an expectant woman is bilingual, she speaks both Spanish and English, but Spanish is her native language, do you still feel that it's important to support her in her native language? Why? And if so, why? What difference does it make?
Yes, definitely. I notice that because of what I explained about myself, how native Spanish speakers that speak English, we have to monitor ourselves. We have to make sure that we're using the proper conjugation of verbs and that we're not mispronouncing a certain word. So for me, it's actually super neat for me to be able to connect to that woman in her native language and to provide that support and to unconsciously let her know, hey, with me, you don't have to monitor yourself. You're safe. I am not judging you. I am not here to listen and pick out your accent. It's okay. I'm in your shoes. I know where you are. Also, it is like when you're in a situation of a lot of emotions, maybe difficulty, pain, discomfort, your brain is working so hard to process everything that language is like, you don't have the brain power to also make sure that you are speaking properly,
Yeah.
So it's also this sense of safety and comfort for them.
I think that's huge. And I think you're such a valuable asset to the birth community here in Utah, where you are, because there are so many women that need that support and need to be able to feel okay being vulnerable and not having to think through everything they're saying. So I think that's so awesome
that you're able to offer that.
So one of my good friends who's a midwife told me that years ago she was at a hospital being a doula for one of her clients, and she would hear this person screaming in another room, and this was like almost 20 years ago, but I can picture this happening, and like I felt so, I felt it in my heart. And it just so happens that that woman did not speak English. Nurses were trying to find someone that would translate between the two. And she told me, Carla, more Spanish speakers need to do this work, because I remember that time. And she said, I could not go and calm her because I could not speak the language. And of course, this topic can get, really political and whatnot. And that's not my point. I know that some people think that if we're here in the United States, we should speak the language, but some people don't. And maybe she did speak it, but maybe she was in such shock that she just could not communicate, So it's a privilege for me to be able to reach to the Latino community.
Yeah, and you just can then connect on this like shared humanity level that is difficult if you're not speaking your native language, that you don't feel like you are being connected with on that level. All right. So do you want to tell us a little bit about your personal experiences as a mother, as a birth giver, and other experiences in your life? How have they influenced the work that you do as a doula?
Right. So you might know or might not know, but the Dominican Republic is one of the countries, third world countries, that has the highest incidence of C-sections. That's just the norm. It's what people do. And the reason being is if you deliver vaginally, you do not have the resources to pay for a doctor's service. So you're in the countryside giving birth vaginally with a partera or a midwife or the community lady that would do that, the granny midwife, basically. And, time went by and people wanted to catch on to what the United States was doing. Because the United States, we're really close to the United States as a country, and so we look after the system here. So I grew up knowing that was the norm, and I honestly never felt like I wanted to have a baby. I did not want to have a C-section. I moved to the United States, and like I said, when I was 17, it's still the same mentality. Like, I'm not interested in going through that. And then my sister-in-law actually was the first person that I've met that have had vaginal births in her house. And I spoke to her, and she said, if I can do it, you can do it. So that's something that we spoke about. She's from Colombia. She's a Latina. She's just a little bit of the non-conventional. She, just like me, she did not want to deal with C-sections. And I felt a little more confident about that. So when I became pregnant, I looked into that option. And that's what I decided to do, because I felt, okay, if I'm going to do this, and if I have the opportunity, why not? When I had my 20 weeks appointment, I learned that my baby was going to come with a cleft. So a cleft lip and a cleft palate, and everything else was okay, thankfully. But almost to the time that I was going to give birth, I was discouraged at the hospital setting. I still had to go to the hospital, even though I had my midwife. I had to go to the hospital to get in-depth ultrasounds to make sure that everything was going okay with my baby. And I received a lot of pushback. And I'm grateful that I had my husband that is just like me. We both love to research and to read and to learn. And I also had a very supportive midwife who had experience supporting women that gave birth to other cleft babies. So I think it was the perfect mix for me to feel confident. Everything was okay. And I remember when I was being told I should not give birth outside of a hospital setting, I remember pushing back and questioning, like, why if everything is okay, why should I not give birth in water like I'm wanting to? And the reasoning behind it is that I would not know how to feed my baby. And so it had nothing to do with the actual birthing. It was after the fact. And I say this because what if I had not questioned? What if I had not inquired more? What if I had not prepared myself enough and know that I was capable to give birth vaginally in water? Also, I had my why, and my why was simply, well, my daughter's going to be born into this world, and she's going to need tens of surgeries, and she's going to spend a lot of time in a hospital setting. So I want her to be born in a calm environment where we can have, the freedom where she can be free to be born at the pace that she wants to be born, and where we can work as a team. And to me, when I gave birth like this, it was like I gave her that, and I gave myself that too, because I was going to become a mom to a baby that had very special circumstances. And being a mom is rough on its own because you're learning how to do that. And so it's like, I deserve this. So I'm just grateful that I found that power within myself, because that was not the norm. You know, I grew up thinking you just listen to the doctor, you do what they say. B, I never had this belief that I was capable of doing much, even though I'm a professional, even though I speak two languages, even though I've come a long way here in the United States. I just did not have that value for myself. And Sarah, when I gave birth and I did that, and I have the privilege of being able to give birth vaginally. Not every woman, not everybody has that privilege. I think that I had that, and it made me into, it woke me up, and it gave me that strength to say, Carla, you can do this, because the months later that came ahead after my birth, they were very difficult, And so it was like, if I did that, I can do this. If I did that, I can do this. So it was like, I think it was my saving grace, I think.
That's beautiful. You just have a beautiful story and beautiful insights. And I'm so glad that you shared them with us today. I'm going to wrap up with 2 questions. 1, if you had to describe your feelings about birth in just one word, what word would it be?
That word would be empowerment.
I love that. I feel like that's just been the message that you've been sharing, that it was an empowering experience for you. And I love that you're able to turn around and help other women be empowered through their experiences. So
Thank you
I think
much.
that's so fitting for the work that you're doing. That's awesome. And my last question is, if our listeners want to follow you on social media, can you share a website or a handle that they can follow to find you?
Hey, yes. So they can find me at Maya Birthing. That's on Instagram, and it's at MAIA Birthing. And that's where I spend most of my time. I'm working on a website and everything else, but that's where you can find me right now.
Great. She does. No, you turn out so many good resources, of course, in both Spanish and English. And so I would encourage everybody who's listening to follow you, Carla. Thank you so much thanks so much for joining me today. I really appreciated talking with you.
Thank you. This was such an honor. Thank you so much.
Did words play an important role in your birth experience? If you're interested in sharing your story on the podcast, go to summitbirthutah.com/birthwords. If you're liking what you hear on the podcast, please leave a review on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or wherever you choose to listen. For more resources about harnessing the power of words to benefit the birth experience, visit summitbirthutah.com/birthwords.